could see this look of emergency in his face and terror.
We weren't quite sure exactly what was happening.
She went from a healthy little girl to a girl with one arm.
I didn't even want to go out just because I don't want people to stare at me.
I had no idea what this pain was. I was just petrified.
It was very frightening to see him that way.
This kid who's never been sick, all of a sudden was on death's doorstep.
Next, two medical mysteries that defy the experts. When Carol Kerpeel discovers a mysterious lump on her daughter's back, the 3-year-old is forced to undergo radical surgery. But it's only the beginning of a terrifying journey that will test both patient and parents in ways they could have never imagined.
I was numb. I could not move. I couldn't breathe. We were in this big world with no answers and a dying child.
Then, a seemingly routine blood test sends an entire lab into crisis mode. The only question now is, can they find the answers in time to save Jake Geiger's life?
My whole body was rebelling. I had no idea what was going on.
I thought, oh my God, my son's gonna die.
When illness strikes, we look to doctors to give us answers. But what if they can't? For these unlucky patients, diagnosis is a mystery. High school sweethearts Carol and Fred Kerpeel got married in the summer of love, 1967, and quickly settled down in Peachtree City, Georgia. More than anything, they looked forward to starting a family. But that simple dream would soon turn into a major struggle.
I wasn't able to carry children, so we thought about adoption as our alternative, and we pursued it from there.
The adoption process is not an easy one. But after 10 long years, the Kerpeels finally bring home their adopted son, Derek.
This was what we wanted to do, was be a family. We became instant parents and an instant family.
Then, in the fall of 1981, Carol and Fred decide to go through the whole thing again. But this time, they adopt a baby girl who they name Laura Ashley Kerpeel.
When they put her in my arms, I just couldn't take my eyes off of her. She was beautiful. She had dark, beautiful, curly hair.
Derek is thrilled to have a little sister, and the young parents are delighted to finally have the family they've always wanted. But a few weeks after bringing Ashley home, Carol notices something odd about her daughter's tiny feet.
The large toe on each foot appeared to be much smaller than the rest of her toes, and a little bunion appeared on each toe. I brought this to the attention of the pediatrician.
But after giving little Ashley a thorough head-to-toe exam, the pediatrician assures the Kerpeels that they have nothing to worry about.
He gave me the answer that it could be a cluster toe, which is not uncommon. I wouldn't be concerned. We'll just say that her husband will have expensive shoe bills.
And just as the doctor promised, Ashley doesn't have any trouble learning to walk. In fact, she hits all of her milestones right on time.
As a toddler, Ashley was very precocious. She was adorable.
For the next 2 years, Ashley continues to thrive and appears no different than any other little girl her age. Then, one day in the fall of 1984, while she's fitting her daughter for a new dress, Carol feels something on Ashley's back that sends a chill up her spine.
I ran my hand along the back side of her right shoulder, and I could feel a very large, warm lump. It was full and red and warm to the touch. It was very scary looking. It was like someone had pumped air up into the right side of her body. I couldn't believe it.
It was as if you got bit by a wasp or a yellow jacket, but in a much, much bigger area. I mean, it was like the size of a man's hand.
I was so panicky, I just couldn't think of anything else but this lump on her back. So we went into the emergency room, we brought our child and said, here we are, please someone see her.
While the Kerpeels wait and worry, their little girl undergoes an extensive battery of tests.
Everyone wanted to come in and see who this little girl was with this mysterious lump on her back. There were so many doctors coming in and out of there, a lot of whispering, a lot of second guessing. So you're sitting there waiting and you want answers and no one seems to be giving you the answers.
The pediatric surgeon believes he can get closer to answering some of these questions, but only if he first secures a biopsy of the lump. Carol and Fred quickly agree, And when 3-year-old Ashley is wheeled into the OR, they're hoping the whole ordeal will soon be over.
After they finished with the biopsy, we were told to return home and that we would get a call that evening if the results came through.
That night, the phone rings, but the call brings more questions than answers.
He said, I just called to give you some news. She has infantile fibromatosis.
Infantile fibromatosis is a benign but aggressive tumor that usually appears in young children on the head, neck, or shoulder. They often grow rapidly and can invade the child's muscles, nerves, and tendons.
They explained that it wasn't a malignant cancerous tumor or anything like that. You know, it wasn't a major problem.
He more or less indicated that we're not going to do anything, we're just going to watch it. I couldn't quite understand what he meant by just watching it. You didn't watch tumors, you didn't watch cancer, you had surgery. And we looked at each other and said, maybe a second opinion would be appropriate.
Taking matters into their own hands, the Kerpeels immediately set up an appointment with an oncologist. Little did they know their world is about to be turned completely upside down.
The doctor said that infantile fibromatosis needed to be dealt with through surgery. This was not anything that you watched.
The oncologist orders a CAT scan. And when the findings come in, alarm bells go off. It appears as though the growth has already spread into Ashley's right arm. And if he doesn't surgically remove the tumor immediately, it will continue to grow. Suddenly faced with this drastically different opinion, Carol and Fred aren't sure what to do.
He kept saying, you don't know until you get in what you're going to find. I can tell you that we'll probably just need to remove that muscle.
We thought about it and agreed to bring Ashley in and to do this. That was the family decision.
The next day, Carol and Fred are a bundle of nerves as they count down the hours to the surgery. But they do their best to keep it together for the sake of their little girl.
There was a song that she used to sing so well, You Are My Sunshine, and she was singing that before they came to take her away. We got her to sing because she was a little curious as to what was going on. We told her someone was going to have to take her.
She got a little bit terrified. The person that came in was in their surgical outfit, and I picked her up, and I was the last person that actually handed her over.
She was crying. She didn't want us to give her away, she kept saying. Well, she's got to do it. She's got to go. And that was the last we saw of her.
As the medical team begins the surgery, Carol and Fred settle in for what they know will be the most agonizing day of their lives. But just halfway into the 5-hour procedure, one of the surgeons comes barreling through the OR doors.
His eyes were wide open. His hands were very red and stressful looking. And I could see this look of emergency in his face and terror. And it was like, did he do something wrong? Did something happen? And he said, oh, Mrs. Kerpeel, where's your husband? I said, well, I just sent him upstairs a little while ago. And he said, well, I have no time to wait for him. We need to talk right away. He was telling me, we've gone through this surgery as far as we can go. I have dissected and dissected. He said, and this tumor has gone up under her arm, around her arm, down her back, around her side. He said, it's just amazing. I have just got to take the arm and shoulder in order to get it all. I kept having him repeat this to me. Do I understand what you're saying? This whole arm has to come. And he said, yes. He said, and I don't have time to wait for your husband. I have to have your permission. We need to get this arm off. I've left her in a terrible state. We've got to get this thing off.
A team of doctors has just discovered that a growth called fibromatosis has invaded a huge section of 3-year-old Ashley Kerpeel's right side. The chief surgeon is now convinced that their only option is to amputate the little girl's entire arm and shoulder.
To get it all, he had to take everything. There could be no waiting for my husband to come back downstairs. Do you understand me, Mrs. Kerpeel? He kept saying, do you understand me? And I just found myself agreeing, shaking my head yes.
Carol came and got me and said that the surgery was so invasive that it got to a point that there were basically just ligaments holding her arm on, and and that they would have to take the arm off. It wasn't a matter of a decision whether we should or we shouldn't.
5 hours later, the surgeon pronounces the amputation a success. And when they're finally allowed to see Ashley, it takes everything in their power just to keep it all together.
I couldn't quite focus. I knew that I was going to have a child with no arm, but at the same time, the demon would be out of her body. And so I had to focus on that.
We're trying to be the strong parents and look at the upside of things. You do what you have to do at the time.
She was on a lot of machinery. I remember hearing the sounds of the pumps, and where her arm and shoulder were was a big pillow.
The next day, the Kerpeels are told that Ashley needs to begin physical therapy immediately.
She had to get up and start walking right away, so they brought a little doll's carriage in, and they asked her to push it down the hall. And before we knew it, she was pushing that stroller down the hallway.
And I remember distinctly the doctor saying, it seems like she'll be more of a fighter.
Over the course of the next 2 weeks, Ashley exceeds everyone's expectations. And the doctor soon decides that she's strong enough to go home for the Christmas holidays.
Having Ashley home was wonderful. She's a bright, wonderful child.
But as little Ashley begins getting used to life with one arm, Fred and Carol are having a much harder time adjusting to how the world sees their daughter.
She went from a healthy little girl to a girl with one arm. She was pretty astounding to look at. 1/4 of her body was missing.
As the harsh new reality sinks in, the young parents vow to do all that they can to help their only daughter lead a full and productive life.
Ashley was still Ashley. There was no doubt about that. I mean, she was a darling little girl.
Slowly, the family begins to reestablish a sense of normalcy. But it's not to last. One morning during the spring of 1985, Carol is getting Ashley dressed when, to her horror, she notices an all-too-familiar bump on the left side of her daughter's back.
There was this big, huge lump, and it was just like the other side. And I immediately panicked because I thought, oh, no way is this going to happen again.
In a state of panic, Carol rushes Ashley to the closest emergency room. But after performing a thorough exam, the on-call doctor assures the anxious mother that there's nothing to worry about.
He kept saying, there's nothing on that side. That swelling is probably due to the fact that she's overusing her left arm. When he said it was overuse, I totally believed him, and I think it's because I wanted to believe him.
Carol breathes a huge sigh of relief and takes her daughter home. Sure enough, within a week, the swelling in her left shoulder starts to go down. But just to be on the safe side, they begin bringing Ashley to pediatric orthopedist Dr. William Schmidt for routine checkups.
The Kerpeels seemed like they were coping with everything they had been through very well. Probably more than I would have.
But during the first couple of visits, Carol begins to notice an alarming new pattern of behavior.
She would run to the elevator to hit that button, and she couldn't reach that button no matter how hard she tried. I said, come on, Ashley, you can do it. Get that arm up there. And she kept saying, but I can't, it hurts. If I do that, it hurts.
After all that Ashley's been through, the Kerpeels can't bear the thought of anything else going wrong.
She demonstrated her lack of motion of one shoulder and one arm, and I just was very suspicious.
Little do the Kerpeels realize that during this seemingly routine visit, their life is about to spiral out of control again. Concerned by the development, Dr. Schmidt orders an X-ray of Ashley's left shoulder, and almost as soon as he sees it, he realizes that something is very wrong.
I obtained an X-ray which revealed some calcification in the paravertebral muscles. Calcification is the laying down of calcium and bone in the muscle. Fibromatosis does not, as a rule, develop any calcification. At that point, I didn't feel that she had fibromatosis.
I couldn't believe he was saying this to me. We had just gotten an okay to continue with our lives.
My first reaction as seeing that she had undergone the amputation based on the diagnosis of fibromatosis. To say I was overwhelmed was putting it mildly. The findings to me were very definite, but I just was hoping I might be wrong.
Just as Carol and Fred Kerpiel are beginning to come to terms with their daughter Ashley's amputation, Dr. William Schmidt has uncovered new evidence that suggests the amputation may have been completely unnecessary.
The more I reviewed my findings, I felt very saddened for the Kerpiels and Ashley.
Dr. Schmidt is confident that a strange calcification that's developed on Ashley's spine proves that she's suffering from an extremely rare and devastating disease. He takes a deep breath and picks up the phone to tell the Kerpiels exactly what he's found.
We were getting ready for our annual Memorial Day picnic, and I was in the kitchen getting a few things, and the phone rang, and it was Dr. Schmidt. And he sounded so sad to me, and I thought, what is this about?
I told her that after reviewing all the information I had obtained from evaluating Ashley, I felt that she had fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva.
Fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, or FOP, is one of the most disabling genetic conditions known to medicine. In healthy individuals, a genetic signal instructs the body where and when to form bone. This begins as the skeleton is formed in the embryo. In patients with FOP, the mutation of a single gene alters these instructions, triggering sporadic and unnecessary bone growth, or ossification, in muscle mass throughout the body. In essence, the patient begins growing an extra skeleton.
As the patient progresses, on X-ray, one can see the development of bone in areas where there should be no bone, in unusual areas. In looking at Ashley's X-rays, the bone was developing more progressively and certainly becoming more definite for FOP.
I never heard of this $1 million word. I had to write it down to make sure I could even spell it correctly. I asked him to explain everything to me, what I needed to know.
To begin with, Ashley first exhibited signs of the debilitating disease when she was just 2 months old. What another doctor considered cluster toes was, in fact, the initial onset of the disease.
The patient with FOP, as a rule, definitely has shortening and abnormal development of the great toes in each foot.
And then, over time, the disease just took on a life of its own.
As the patient develops bone in the muscles, they will develop these areas of swelling that are tender. I think at the time that she had her first symptoms in the right shoulder, that was probably her first flare-up.
He goes on to explain that the latest swelling in Ashley's left shoulder is a clear indicator that the muscles in her remaining arm are beginning to transform into bone as well.
Eventually, her body would become very rigid, and basically, they become immobile. I couldn't believe I was hearing this. It was just so unbelievable.
As the Kerpiels struggle to come to terms with a devastating diagnosis, they can't help but wonder why no other doctor was able to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
On the biopsy, fibromatosis can look a lot like FOP. So it can be a very difficult pathological diagnosis to make because it was so rare. It just was not expected.
The Kerpiels' next step is to reach out to the world's leading expert on FOP, Dr. Fred Kaplan. And their first question is one they can hardly bear to ask.
I wanted to know, did the arm come off for no reason?
The amputation was done to save her life at that point because of the enormous amount of difficulty that was encountered. I don't think that the surgeons planned to do an amputation when they took Ashley into the operating room. Nevertheless, she came at him with an amputation and a catastrophic event that changed the rest of her life.
It was a misdiagnosis, and there was a surgery that shouldn't have been done. And it was just absolute devastating information to get.
Unfortunately, almost 90% of FOP patients around the world are misdiagnosed. Not only misdiagnosed, but often have dangerous, painful, unnecessary procedures that actually worsen their condition.
In fact, research has proven that any sort of trauma or invasive procedure in an FOP patient can trigger catastrophic explosions of new bone growth.
Once the bone forms, it stays there. Sometimes spontaneously, but often after minor bruises and injuries, the FOP gets activated again. It's like a bear that's sleeping. Sometimes it sleeps, and sometimes it doesn't take much to wake this bear from hibernation, and that bear becomes very angry, attacks other skeletal muscle, and eventually replaces almost all of the body's skeletal muscles with extra bone. This is a complete metamorphosis.
Unfortunately, it is a metamorphosis that will continue for the rest of Ashley's life. There is no known cure or treatment for FOP.
At that time, there was very little known about this condition, and we had no other medications to administer these patients.
Without any way to stop the second skeleton from growing, Ashley's prognosis is grim.
The ultimate progression of the disease can lead to an early death. And the way that usually occurs is that chest expansion is limited and the patient has difficulty ventilating and expanding the lungs to get the adequate oxygen necessary.
I remember crying uncontrollably. I asked him how long he thought she had to live, and he said he thought it would be anywhere between 2 and 10 years because she was progressing so fast. I was numb. I could not move. I couldn't breathe. What was I to do? We were in this big world with no answers and a dying child.
When Ashley Kerpeel was 3 years old, she was diagnosed with FOP, an extremely rare, crippling, and often life-threatening bone disorder, and her doctors didn't expect her to live past age 10. But as it turns out, Ashley is a survivor who has been beating the odds for almost her entire life.
From a very young age, and I never knew anything else besides having FOP.
Unfortunately, coping with her disease has often been made worse by the pain of being different.
It was very hard. Sometimes I didn't even want to go out just because I don't want people to stare at me.
A lot of kids were a little bit afraid of her because she was so different looking.
In an attempt to help their daughter fit in, the Kerpeels decide to get Ashley a prosthetic arm when she enters 2nd grade.
I wanted her to be normal, so I would send her to school in this little arm, and I felt very fulfilled because I could see a whole body.
I didn't have any muscle to operate anything, so this huge piece of plastic wrapped around the back of my neck underneath my left arm up on my chest. I went to school one day and I came off the school bus and the arm was turned around and like hanging off my back.
She'd say, "Hi, Mommy," and I'm looking at this arm behind her, and all the kids are kind of, and I said, "Ashley, your arm, quick, can I bring it forward?" And she'd say, "Oh, okay," and she'd pull it forward, and I'm thinking to myself, she's wearing this arm for me, not for her. I said, "Ashley, let's throw this in the garbage." Okay.
Throughout her adolescence, Ashley does her best to lead as normal a life as possible. But the disease is slowly ravaging her fragile body.
I've had flare-ups on and off my whole life. I lost mobility in my left arm slowly. I used to reach my forehead and comb my hair, and then over time, I wasn't able to anymore.
I wish there was such a thing as a mild case of FOP, but there really isn't.
Today, Ashley is 26 years old. Her left arm is essentially frozen from the elbow up. She has limited movement in her neck, and her right hip and leg are fused in a semi-sitting position. She now wears a custom-made shoe, which helps compensate for the irregular shape of her leg.
As much as I hate FOP and what it does to our body and the pain it causes, I can't imagine my life without it. I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't have this. I can't imagine not being me.
Despite the disabling disease, Ashley lives a very active life. She works for her father at their home office, coordinating corporate conferences, and spends most of her free time volunteering. The Kerpeels remain hopeful that during Ashley's lifetime, researchers will find a cure. In just the last 2 years, Dr. Fred Kaplan and his team have identified the gene that causes FOP.
It was a gene that encoded a switch that was involved in bone formation. Our job now is trying to understand the exact reason that the switch is behaving that way and to design the right drug to prevent that switch from causing this second skeleton to form.
When the cure happens, it's going to be a huge, huge deal for all of us and the kids to come that haven't even been diagnosed yet, that they won't have to deal with what we've dealt with.
Because we have Fred Kaplan in our lives, I sleep better at night. The fact that they found the gene gives me all kinds of hope. And there is hope for Ashley, indeed. She looks for the day when she will have a lot of freedom as far as her body goes. If I had to sum it all up for Ashley, I'd have to say to be continued.
I tell a lot of people there are a lot of things in life that you can't change, but there's one thing you can do, and it's just live with it.
High school sweethearts Carol and Fred Kerpeel got married in the summer of love, 1967, and quickly settled down in Peachtree City, Georgia. More than anything, they looked forward to starting a family. But that simple dream would soon turn into a major struggle.
I wasn't able to carry children, so we thought about adoption as our alternative, and we pursued it from there.
The adoption process is not an easy one. But after 10 long years, the Kerpeels finally bring home their adopted son, Derek.
This was what we wanted to do, was be a family. We became instant parents and an instant family.
Then, in the fall of 1981, Carol and Fred decide to go through the whole thing again. But this time, they adopt a baby girl who they name Laura Ashley Kerpeel.
When they put her in my arms, I just couldn't take my eyes off of her. She was beautiful. She had dark, beautiful, curly hair.
Derek is thrilled to have a little sister, and the young parents are delighted to finally have the family they've always wanted. But a few weeks after bringing Ashley home, Carol notices something odd about her daughter's tiny feet.
The large toe on each foot appeared to be much smaller than the rest of her toes, and a little bunion appeared. I could see this look of emergency in his face and terror.
We weren't quite sure exactly what was happening.
She went from a healthy little girl to a girl with one arm.
I didn't even want to go out just because I don't want people to stare at me.
I had no idea what this pain was. I was just petrified.
It was very frightening to see him that way.
This kid who's never been sick, all of a sudden was on death's doorstep.
Next, two medical mysteries that defy the experts. When Carol Kerpeel discovers a mysterious lump on her daughter's back, the 3-year-old is forced to undergo radical surgery. But it's only the beginning of a terrifying journey that will test both patient and parents.
Appeared on each toe. I brought this to the attention of the pediatrician.
But after giving little Ashley a thorough head-to-toe exam, the pediatrician assures the Kerpeels that they have nothing to worry about.
He gave me the answer that it could be a cluster toe, which is not uncommon. I wouldn't be concerned. We'll just say that her husband will have expensive shoe bills.
And just as the doctor promised, Ashley doesn't have any trouble learning to walk. In fact, she hits all of her milestones right on time.
As a toddler, Ashley was very precocious. She was adorable.
For the next 2 years, Ashley continues to thrive and appears no different than any other little girl her age. Ways they could have never imagined.
I was numb. I could not move. I couldn't breathe. We were in this big world with no answers and a dying child.
Then, a seemingly routine blood test sends an entire lab into crisis mode. The only question now is, can they find the answers in time to save Jake Geiger's life?
My whole body was rebelling. I had no idea what was going on.
I thought, oh my God, my son's gonna die.
When illness strikes, we look to doctors to give us answers. But what if they can't? For these unlucky patients, diagnosis is a mystery.